Most parents who watch their children fight assume they are witnessing a personality clash or a failure of fairness. They are not. They are watching something far more specific and far more consequential than a squabble over a toy. What they are seeing is the early training ground for every close relationship that child will have for the rest of their life. Sibling relationships are the longest-running relationships most people will ever have, and the patterns that get established in childhood do not simply fade when the children grow up. They become the template. The way a child learns to handle jealousy, negotiate sharing, recover from a harsh word, and return to connection with a sibling is the same neural pathway they will use with a partner, a colleague, a friend, 20 years later. And here is the part almost no parent has been told. The research on sibling relationships is not primarily about reducing conflict. It is about what happens in the moments immediately after conflict ends. The repair is where the relationship is built. The fight itself is almost irrelevant compared to whether the children learn, through repeated experience, that conflict does not mean the relationship breaks. If a child grows up believing that disagreement equals disconnection, they will carry that belief into every adult relationship they form. If they grow up experiencing, over and over, that two people can be angry with each other and still be safe with each other, that belief becomes their emotional default. By the end of this video, you will understand exactly what the research says about why sibling conflict happens when it does, why most common parental responses accidentally make the long-term relationship worse, and what specific, ordinary behaviors you can use starting today that build the neural pathways for lifelong closeness instead of lifelong distance. If you are watching this while your children are in another room and you are wondering whether the silence means they are getting along or something has gone terribly wrong, you are in exactly the right place. Everything I am covering here draws from peer-reviewed child development research and established guidance from pediatric and psychological organizations. This is education, not personal advice for your child's specific situation. So before you make any decisions about your child's health, behavior, or development, talk to your pediatrician or a qualified child psychologist. In the next 20 minutes, I'm going to walk you through 4 things in order. First, what is actually happening in a child's brain during sibling conflict, and why the age of your children matters more than almost anything else. Second, the 3 most common parental responses that feel right in the moment but teach children that relationships are fragile and conditional. Third, the counterintuitive research finding that changes how experts think about favoritism, fairness, and which child actually needs more attention. And fourth, a set of specific practical strategies you can use in ordinary daily moments that build sibling closeness without requiring extra time, special activities, or a household that runs like a therapy session. If what you have heard so far already makes you think about your own children differently, that is the point. To understand why siblings fight the way they do, you need to understand one thing about the brain they are working with. The prefrontal cortex is the part of the brain that handles impulse control, emotional regulation, perspective-taking, and the ability to pause before reacting. Think of it as the control tower of the brain, the structure that manages traffic and keeps everything from colliding. In a fully developed adult brain, that control tower is complete. In a child, it is still being built. The construction does not finish until the mid-20s. A 2-year-old who hits their older sibling for touching their toy is not being malicious. Their control tower is not online yet. They are experiencing an emotion, usually something like frustration or a sense of violation, and their brain literally does not have the wiring to manage that emotion without an external assist. This is why sibling conflict peaks between the ages of 2 and 4, according to longitudinal research published in the journal Child Development. During this window, the younger child has enough language to express wants but not enough emotional regulation to handle the inevitable frustration of having to share space, attention, and resources with an older sibling who is bigger, faster, and more verbally skilled. The older sibling, meanwhile, is usually between 4 and 7, old enough to feel a sense of injustice, but not old enough to consistently regulate their own reactions when provoked. The result is a collision between 2 brains that are both missing the same piece of equipment. The American Academy of Pediatrics notes that sibling conflict is most frequent and most intense when children are between 2 and 4 years apart in age, which is the most common spacing in many families. This is not a design flaw in your children. It is a developmental window where the brain hardware does not yet match the social demands being placed on it. Now here is where it gets more interesting and more useful. When researchers study what happens during sibling conflict, they do not actually measure the fight itself. They measure something called co-regulation. Co-regulation is the process by which a child borrows emotional stability from a calm adult the way a phone borrows signal from a cell tower that is already connected. The child does not generate their own calm yet. They absorb it from someone who already has it. When a parent enters a sibling conflict while still regulated, their breathing, their tone, their body language, and their deliberate pace all transmit a signal that the child's nervous system can pick up and mirror. When a parent enters while dysregulated, which means their own nervous system is activated, stressed, or overwhelmed, the child borrows that state instead. The child escalates not because they are defiant, but because their brain is taking its cue from the nearest available source of regulation, and that source is currently broadcasting alarm. This is not a moral failing on the parent's part. It is a physiological reality. A parent who has been interrupted 5 times in 10 minutes, who is running on 4 hours of sleep, who has heard screaming for the past half hour, is operating with a depleted nervous system. The research on parental burnout from the Journal of Child and Family Studies shows that chronic sleep deprivation and unrelenting demand significantly reduce a parent's capacity for co-regulation. The child does not need a perfect parent. They need a regulated one, and regulation is a renewable resource that requires rest and recovery to replenish. The second forward pull is this. If the brain hardware is incomplete and the parent's regulation is the temporary bridge, then the specific words a parent uses during conflict matter enormously, and most of the common phrases parents reach for are teaching exactly the wrong lesson about relationship. The second response is the forced apology. When a parent insists that a child say sorry before they are ready, they are teaching that apologies are a performance to escape consequences, not a genuine expression of care for the other person's experience. A child who apologizes while still angry learns to associate apology with humiliation. A child who receives a forced apology learns that words are empty and that their hurt does not matter enough to be acknowledged with genuine feeling. The research on moral development from Dr. Gordon Neufeld and others shows that children cannot access genuine remorse until they have first returned to a state of emotional safety. Pushing for an apology while a child is still dysregulated is like asking someone to write a thoughtful letter while they are running from a bear. The brain cannot do both at once. The practical alternative is to model the repair yourself first. You say to the child who was hurt, "That must have been really upsetting when the truck was grabbed. I am sorry that happened." Then you turn to the child who grabbed it and say, "When you are ready, your sister needs to know you care about how she feels." You do not wait all day. You wait for the actual readiness, which usually arrives within a few minutes if the child is not being shamed. Then you facilitate the connection, not the words. The words follow naturally once the feeling is genuine. The third response is equal treatment. This one surprises parents because it sounds like the definition of fairness. But equal treatment and fair treatment are not the same thing, and children know the difference even when they cannot articulate it. When a parent gives both children the same snack, the same bedtime, the same consequence, regardless of age or need, the older child feels infantilized and the younger child feels set up to fail at standards they are not developmentally ready to meet. The research on distributive justice in childhood from Dr. William Damon at Stanford shows that children as young as 4 understand that fair does not mean identical. Fair means taking into account what each person actually needs. A 6-year-old who is told to share equally with a 2-year-old is being asked to ignore a developmental reality that they can clearly see. The 2-year-old does not understand turn-taking, does not have the same impulse control, and will not remember the agreement 5 minutes later. The 6-year-old learns that their parent values the appearance of fairness over actual fairness. The alternative is to name the difference out loud. You are 6, so you can wait 10 minutes for your turn. Your brother is 2, so his turn is shorter because his brain is still learning to wait. That is fair, even though it is not the same. This teaches both children that relationships account for real differences, and that fairness is a thoughtful process, not a mechanical split. The forward pull is this. If these 3 responses are so common and so well-intentioned, then the question is not why parents use them. The question is what the research says about what children actually need to build closeness. And the answer involves a finding about favoritism that almost every parent gets backwards. There is a research finding that has been replicated across multiple studies and multiple countries, and it changes almost everything about how we think about attention, fairness, and which child in a sibling pair is actually struggling the most. When researchers ask children whether their parents have a favorite, approximately 65% say yes. When researchers ask parents the same question, the vast majority say no, and the parents who say yes usually identify the same child. But here is the surprising part. When researchers observe actual family interactions and measure attention, warmth, and responsiveness, they find something that does not match either the children's reports or the parents' self-assessments. The child who is actually receiving the most parental attention is rarely the child who feels favored. And the child who feels least favored is usually the only one whose perception is accurate. This is not because parents are secretly cruel. It is because attention and favoritism are not the same thing, and children measure them on completely different scales than adults do. Think of parental attention like sunlight. A plant that is struggling, that is wilting, that has brown leaves, gets more water and more light than a plant that is thriving. The struggling plant is not being favored. It is being supported because it needs more support to reach the same baseline. But if the thriving plant does not understand this, it looks like favoritism. The thriving plant sees only the extra water, not the reason behind it. In sibling research, the child who is actually struggling the most, behaviorally or emotionally, usually receives the most parental attention and intervention. That child is the wilting plant. The other child, who is coping better, sees this as the parent preferring their sibling. The parent, meanwhile, is often exhausted by the high-needs child and may unconsciously show more warmth and ease to the child who is easier to be around. So the easier child gets more positive emotional moments, while the struggling child gets more correction and direction. Both children end up feeling less favored than the other. The struggling child feels corrected too much. The easier child feels noticed too little. And neither child's perception matches the reality of where the parent's energy is actually going. The practical implication is that you cannot solve this by trying to give equal attention. Equal attention is impossible and, according to the research, not even what children want. What protects sibling relationships is something called differential treatment with warmth, which means giving each child what they actually need while making sure both children feel known and valued for who they are specifically. The child who needs more support right now gets more support, but the child who is managing well gets explicit acknowledgement for their strengths. You have been so patient while I helped your brother with his homework. I noticed that, and it matters to me. That single sentence does more for the easier child's sense of security than an extra hour of undivided attention, because it tells them that they are seen even when they are not the crisis. And for the struggling child, the protection comes from the parent not making the easier child into a standard to be met. You do not say, "Why can't you be more like your sister?" You say, "You and your sister need different things right now, and my job is to figure out what each of you needs." That framing teaches both children that love is not a competition and that needing more help does not make someone less worthy. The research on sibling relationships points to 5 specific practices that parents can use in ordinary daily life, and they work in a particular order because each one builds on the one before it. The first practice is to narrate the relationship, not just the behavior. Most parental commentary during sibling interactions focuses on what each child is doing individually. Share your toys. Be gentle. Use your words. These are behavior corrections, and they are necessary, but they do not build the relationship itself. To build the relationship, you need to name the connection between the children out loud, especially when it is positive and even when it is small. You handed him the block before he even had to ask. You were paying attention to what he needed. Or, you looked really worried when she fell. That is because you care about her, even when you are annoyed with her. This is called relationship narration, and it works because it builds what psychologists call the internal working model of the sibling relationship. Think of an internal working model as the story a child tells themselves about what kind of relationship this is. If the story is we fight a lot and our parent is always intervening, the relationship feels fragile and conflict-driven. If the story is we annoy each other sometimes, but we also notice and care about each other, the relationship feels durable and connection-based. Every time you narrate a moment of care, attention, or mutual enjoyment, you are adding a sentence to that story. You are not inventing something that is not there. You are noticing something that is already there and giving it language, which makes it more likely to happen again. The second practice is to create shared meaning around ordinary routines. Sibling closeness does not come from special outings or manufactured bonding activities. It comes from repeated, predictable moments where both children are oriented toward the same thing and both feel competent. The research on family rituals from Dr. Barbara Fees at the University of Illinois shows that even simple routines, when done together consistently, become what she calls family identity anchors. These are the moments that children later remember, as this is what our family is like. For siblings, the most powerful anchors are the ones where both children have a distinct role that matters. Not, help your brother clean up, which makes one child the assistant and one child the boss. But you are in charge of the napkins and you are in charge of the forks, and together you set the table. The together part is what matters. The children are not parallel. They are interdependent. Each role is necessary and neither role works without the other. This teaches, through repeated experience, that the sibling is not a competitor for resources, but a necessary partner in getting things done. The third practice is to protect the repair moment after conflict. This is the highest value reframe in the entire video, and it is the one that changes how you think about every fight you have ever watched your children have. When researchers code sibling conflict videos, they find that the fight itself, the argument or the hit or the grab, is almost never what predicts long-term relationship quality. What predicts it is what happens in the next 5 to 10 minutes. If the children return to baseline separately, without interaction, they learn that conflict ends with distance. If one child approaches the other and is rejected, they learn that repair is risky. If the parent forces proximity before either child is ready, they learn that their feelings do not matter as much as the parent's desire for peace. But if the parent creates the conditions for a natural repair, without forcing it, the children learn that conflict is a disruption, not a destruction, and that the relationship can absorb it. The practical way to do this is to stay present, but not directive after the peak of the conflict. You do not send them to separate rooms immediately. You do not demand that they apologize. You sit with them, or near them, in a calm state, and you wait. You might say, I am right here when you are both ready to figure this out. That presence, without pressure, creates a bridge. Usually, within a few minutes, one child will make a small move toward the other. A glance, a tentative offer of a toy, a silly face. Your job is to notice it and name it. You just looked at her to see if she was okay. That is how people care about each other, even when they are mad. That moment of repair, witnessed and named, is worth more than 100 forced apologies. The fourth practice is to give each child one-on-one time that is protected and predictable, but brief. The research on sibling rivalry from the University of Michigan shows that the total amount of one-on-one time matters, less than the predictability of it. A child who knows that every Saturday morning they get 20 minutes alone with a parent feels more secure than a child who gets an hour randomly once a month. The predictability tells the child's nervous system that their connection to the parent is stable and reliable, which reduces the need to compete with the sibling for proof of that connection. The time does not need to be elaborate. It can be a walk to the mailbox, a shared snack while the other child naps, or 10 minutes of reading before bed. What matters is that it is named, protected, and consistent. This is our Saturday morning time. Your brother knows not to interrupt because this is just for us. That framing tells the child that they do not need to fight for attention because attention is already scheduled and guaranteed. The fifth practice is to separate the children when your own regulation is gone. This is the one that requires the most honesty, and it is the one that protects the relationship from the most damage. There will be moments when you cannot co-regulate two children because you cannot regulate yourself. You are too tired, too triggered, too overwhelmed. In those moments, the most protective thing you can do is separate the children physically and give yourself a reset. Not as a punishment, not as a consequence, but as a physiological necessity. You say, I need a few minutes to calm my body down so I can help you both. I am going to put you in different rooms for 10 minutes, and then we will try again. This teaches the children that regulation is a real need, that adults have limits, and that the relationship is important enough to pause for rather than push through while damaged. It also prevents you from saying or doing something in a dysregulated state that becomes a memory the children carry. The research on adverse childhood experiences shows that it is not the conflict itself that causes harm. It is the absence of repair and the presence of adult behavior that frightens or shames the child. Separating the children to protect your own regulation is not a failure. It is a specific, research-supported strategy for preserving the relationship that if what you have just heard already makes you want to try one of these practices today, that is exactly the response the research predicts. These are not theories. They are behaviors that have been observed, measured, and replicated across thousands of families. Let me give you the exact order to start these practices, because the order matters and trying to do all 5 at once is a reliable way to do none of them well. Start with relationship narration, because it requires no extra time and it changes how you see your children while you are changing how they see each other. For 1 week, simply notice and name 1 moment per day where your children showed care, attention, or cooperation with each other. Do not force it. Do not invent it. Just see what is already there and put words to it. After 1 week, add shared meaning around one routine. Pick something you already do daily, like breakfast or bedtime, and give each child a specific, necessary role. After 2 weeks of those 2 practices, add the protected repair moment after conflict. Stay present after the next fight. Do not force resolution, and watch for the small signal that one child is ready to reconnect. Name that signal when you see it. Only after those 3 feel natural should you add the predictable one-on-one time and the honest separation when you are dysregulated. The reason for this order is that each practice builds the skill you need for the next one. You cannot repair conflict effectively until you have practiced seeing connection. You cannot create shared routines until you have the language of relationship narration in your head. You cannot protect one-on-one time until you trust that the children are building connection with each other, not just competing for you. Now, I need to be honest about where these practices end and where a professional genuinely earns their involvement. If your children are engaging in physical violence that causes injury, if one child is consistently and severely targeted by the other, if there is verbal abuse that is damaging a child's sense of safety or self-worth, or if the sibling conflict is part of a larger pattern of behavioral or emotional difficulty in one or both children, these practices are not enough. The research on sibling aggression from the University of New Hampshire distinguishes between ordinary conflict, which is developmental and manageable, and sibling abuse, which requires professional intervention. If you are unsure which category your family falls into, check current guidance at healthychildren.org or speak with your pediatrician. A qualified child psychologist can assess the specific dynamics in your home and create a tailored plan that goes beyond what any video can provide. What I have given you here is a foundation. It is not a ceiling that if you have made it this far, you have already done something that most parents never get the chance to do. You have spent 20 minutes understanding your children's brains instead of just reacting to their behavior. That shift from reaction to understanding is the single most powerful change a parent can make. The last thing I want to leave you with is this. Most parents measure their success by how much conflict they prevent. They count the fights, the arguments, the moments of jealousy, and they assume that fewer means better. But the research does not support that measure. What the research supports is this. The siblings who remain close into adulthood are not the ones who never fought. They are the ones who learned, through thousands of small experiences in childhood, that conflict does not break a relationship unless you let it. They learned that anger is a feeling, not a verdict. They learned that the person who frustrates you today is the same person who will sit with you in a hospital waiting room decades from now, and that the relationship is strong enough to survive both. Your children are not failing when they fight. They are practicing, and your job is not to prevent the practice. It is to make sure they practice the right things. Repair. Connection after disconnection. The belief that love is durable even when it is inconvenient. That is the legacy you are building, one ordinary afternoon at a time, that I want to ask you something specific, and I would genuinely love to read your answers in the comments. Think about your own sibling relationship, or the sibling relationship you wish you had had. What is one small moment from your childhood, positive or negative, that shaped how you think about siblings today? Your answer might be exactly what another parent needs to read.